So my name is Dr. Michael Smith, and I teach what's called Qing or TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, psychology, psychotherapy, and to some degree psychiatry. And as we get into that somewhat touchy subject, I just want to say that traditional Chinese medicine isn't focused on the study of illness. It's focused more on understanding how people adapt to illness or how they adapt to distress in an individual subjective pattern. So we don't often diagnose diseases so much as recognize patterns of adaptive behavior and how that can sometimes limit how we heal or create symptoms that are a lot more intense than perhaps they need to be. And this is especially true when it comes to mental and emotional health. So today we're going to be talking about what's called the Wu Zhi or Wu Shen, the five wills, five spirits, and there's other names for them in different contexts. And before I get into that, I just want to speak a little bit about Daoist cosmology in the sense that cosmology in Taoism is kind of like the atmosphere, in the sense there's the stars that are kind of what we might think of as against the surface of the sky, and then there's the space between the sky and the atmosphere, and then there's all the layers in the atmosphere, and then there's the ground, and when you look at the earth even, there's like the crust and the mantle and, you know, all of that. So when we look at the universe and cosmology and ontology in the sense of layers, then we have this opportunity to figure out, one, where do most humans experience their life, you know, in the sense of which layer, and what are the layers that we can access slightly above or slightly below that. So when we're healing, when we're growing, when we're meditating, when we're practicing different things, that gives us a sense of how we kind of fit into the world, and perhaps what we might want to negotiate with, become more aware of, as we develop a more conscious experience of living. So, if you've never heard of the five wills, they are, well, at first in Chinese, Hun, Po, Shen, Yi, and Zhi. Hun means your ethereal soul, or the part of you that's sort of the consciousness behind you. Pa is kind of like your genetics or your physical overall vitality in a way, and we're going to get into this in a lot more detail shortly. Shen we often translate as spirit. Yi often is translated as perception or awareness in different ways, sometimes intention. And Zhi is kind of like just the idea of will, willpower, willingness, and things like that. So let's dive in and see what we can learn. And because there's kind of a lot to cover, I just want to speak very clearly about the content. So I'm just going to basically read some things, talk about it, read a couple of things, and then talk about it. And then after that, we'll have lots of time for Q&A. So let's see what happens. Imagine living in a world full of animate, aware, and sometimes predictable ghosts. Certain places and certain times of year, there are more ghosts. And that's just a part of the natural world. On some level, you're aware that you may become a ghost, you know, in the sense of after you die. Or you might have the perception that you already have or are a spirit or a ghost. Or, depending on your culture, you might have the experience that you have one or more or even many different kinds of ghosts or spirits inside of you. Every culture has had that perception of experience and being at some time, and even today. So Chinese is not a literal language or a literal culture. It's actually very close to an indigenous culture in the sense of language and meaning. Excuse me. So it isn't necessary for us to actually believe that ghosts are literally real, or for us to have a conscious relationship with the possibility of there being kind of more going on than just what modern, you know, science wants us to understand. But we don't need to take the terminology literally. You don't have to believe in anything to benefit from some practical wisdom about how to engage with the unconscious parts of yourself, your identity, and your behavior. We want to take a look at what is behind the curtain of our conscious self. So when we think of Chinese medicine, often the first thing that comes to mind is yin and yang. So there's kind of an ocean of yin, an ocean of yang, an ocean of water, an ocean of light, and they are in a way behind what we consider the physical universe in this context. And as creation becomes more specific in the sense of planets and stars and things like that, that mixture of those two oceans, the substance and the light, obviously creates what we call the 10,000 things, all, phenomena that exist within existence. And when we think of that more in the sense of beings with awareness, beings with bodies, then those oceans become the ocean of Hun, the ethereal soul, and the ocean of Pa, the more substantial physical soul, or what's often called the corporeal soul. And when they come together, they create the kind of kernel of existence, the kind of chi and animation that creates individual life. So when we take a moment and think of Hun as that ocean of awareness becoming aware of itself in a very kind of soul-oriented way, that's what's moving through us in some sense as awareness. And Pa is that ocean of phenomena that come and go and live and die, which creates a very certain sense of purpose and animation in life. Shen is the aspect of reality, or spirit is the aspect of reality that experiences reality, perhaps in the context of what I would call sacred reverence. And that's, I think, an important thing in this sense of spiritual practice. Yi, or awareness, the perception we have of experience, is somewhere again between attention and intention. And we often want to think of that as our interactive awareness. So coming to Zhi, that sense of willingness and willpower, there's an old statement in one of the old texts that say, when your spirit and your awareness direct your mind consistently and coherently, the will actually forms some kind of, you could say, spiritual intention in the universe, and it wants to orientate life towards completing that outcome, whatever it might be. So another way we can visualize the Zhi, or the five wills, is to imagine five snakes. Now, I recognize this can get a little trippy or psychedelic, but just play with the imagery. We have these five snakes, and each one is a different color. It doesn't matter which colors, but just imagine five different colored snakes. Imagine five snakes that have different kind of facial expressions, different moods, if you will. And each one is on a different journey, and everyone knows that about each different kinds of snake. Like, you're this kind of snake, you want to go that way, or you want to eat that thing. So for some reason, the snakes decide, kind of on their own, and somehow they magically can, begin slithering and kind of swimming in the way that they do. But instead of on the surface of the world, they try and swim upwards, kind of through gravity towards the moon. Now, it turns out, the universe being the universe, that snakes on their own cannot fly to the moon. So the five snakes decide to wrap around each other and combine their chi to spiral upwards. And as they move upwards, gaining experience in cooperation and momentum of movement, they're all doing it for their own purpose, but they're also having to work together. And because of that, here are the five snakes spiraling upwards towards the moon. Every once in a while, each individual snake wants to go on its own journey in its own direction to meet the needs that it's actually trying to accomplish. And that creates a little bit of chaos, because imagine these five snakes are, going in one direction, and then one snake says, I want to go towards the sun. And maybe it tries to pull the other snakes, or it unravels and kind of goes off on its own. And then all the snakes fall, and then they get going again. So the reason I'm playing out that visual metaphor is that without a collaborative unity of your five souls, your soul growth is going to be kind of chaotic and impulsive and, just doesn't really have a lot of long-term intention or practice or outcome. And that's actually where most of us start, and that's why it's a great image for that. So After a while, you could say each snake, having different needs and natures, and having tried to go on their own, come to the realization that they have to shift their nature a little bit. You could say mature a little bit, so that all of the snakes find some consensus about where they are going, how they're going to get there, and maybe even in the sense of your whole life, where they're going to go for a period of time, taking turns as to who's guiding the journey. And that can be very important, I think. So, with all of that having been said, the way they move forward and continue learning, there's a sense that at some point each of the snakes, each of the whales, each of our deeper conscious and unconscious needs will actually get where it's going. And you could say that's learning a little bit about self-trust and a lot about patience and being willing to learn as you go. So let's meet these inner guides, these parts of you that are mostly silent. They can only whisper to you through your dreams, through deep states of reverie. They sometimes show up in near-death experiences and sometimes during psychedelic journeys. So let's go back to our Hunan Po and make sure we have that image that there's these two oceans that become rivers, that become streams, that become more and more specific. One is made of water, and eventually it becomes a drop of water, which you could say is your paw. And then there's all this light from this ocean of light bouncing off of clouds and becoming rainbows and things until it becomes just the right reflection or sparkle or something of light that is now inside of you and moving through you. So the uniqueness is important, but the fact that we all share these oceans is also important. So when we think of the Hun, that ocean of soul, spirit, consciousness, the potential of consciousness, what I think Jung used to call the collective unconscious, there's a lot in there. And some people describe that as race memory, as cultural memory. And this is an important thing to consider historically, because each of us is, kind of the byproduct or the outcome of countless generations of people. And depending on their cultures, their needs, their beliefs, their aversions, their desires, we come into being with a kind of narrow stream, and a narrower stream until we become that drop. And that creates also our needs. So when we have these deep kind of implicit yearnings in life, they're often coming from that Hun, which has some cultural context that sometimes we have to negotiate with a little bit. So there's three things that we want to pay attention to with your Hun. It brings your sense, what we call character, in the sense of, how solid of an individual you are in the world, or perhaps how sketchy of an individual you might, have been or might still be exploring. So character is, about how you could say mature and ethical we are in some sense. It also can connect with what modern psychology would consider characteristics, traits, personality, disorders, or other things that very much define how it is that we experience the world. And in a similar way, astrology attempts to describe people being born at different months, different years, things like that, coming into being with a sense of volition, like this is what I'm here to be. And astrology's sometimes kind of freakishly accurate, so it's worth paying attention to in some ways. So Hun also brings the ability to gather and apply our intelligence, not in the sense of how smart you are, but how able you are to learn and be more effective in some ways. It's also the aspect of us that's willing to feel our feelings. And this is a big part of Chinese medicine, what we call emotional intelligence. We all often think our feelings first, or think about our feelings before we really feel them raw in their deep emotional, instinctual nature. So when we come into that awareness of emotional intelligence, the Hun kind of decides based on your gifts and limits how available you are to feeling. And that doesn't mean it's bound in stone. It means you might start with a little, or you might start with too much. And somewhere in the middle of that, you will find just the right amount of emotional intelligence for your life and how you live. And who you are. We often say that the liver guides the hun, or more precisely kind of aims the hun like a bow and arrow or something. So your liver is a part of your present self, it's part of the present world, and it's a part of your sense of purpose. So when you aim your purpose, what's behind your purpose is your ancestors, the collective unconscious, all of the gifts and limits that come in that way. So when either the hun itself isn't deeply connected to our lives, lots of reasons, when perhaps the liver as a system of physiology and function isn't doing so well, then we see a lack of hun coming into the world, a lack of our sense of connection and resource with spirit. So people often feel aimless, dispassionate, depressed, sometimes even suicidal. And there's so many things we can do to sort that out and to create better connection. When we think of this in the modern context, my favorite analogy is we all learn to drive with one of our parents beside us, or maybe in the back seat. And when we're driving around at 15 or 16 and trying it out for the first time, we don't know how to drive. We're learning how to drive. But our parent, or perhaps our driving instructor, is the one who kind of shouts, "Hey, watch out for that, don't forget your signals," and all the rules of driving. And in a way, that's good to be connected with, and in a way it's also what dreams are kind of understood to mean. So if your dream life is very full of vivid imagery and clear messages, then you could say the backseat driver of your ancestors or hun is trying to help you reset the course of how you're living your life. When we think of Pa, the corporeal soul, as a notion of perhaps cells that become or have decided to become a living body, and a body that has an expiry date, that changes us, or that gives us and limits us in different ways. And nowadays we think of that as genetics, epigenetics, and things like that. It also holds in some way our connection to our physical instincts and our sort of survival tactics, if you will, from a reflexive movement to maybe how we like plan to deal with some calamity or something like that. Not so much in the mental sense, but in the visceral sense of how we respond to something that might threaten our survival. So 3 things about Pa that are useful to be aware of. It brings into our inherited physical characteristics and our sense of vitality. So that might be your physical size and the sense of height and things, your physical strength and connection to your body, and also this quality of mojo or aliveness or vitality. And we want to recognize that, with traditions that revolve around animism, there's an understanding that anima, meaning spirit in action or spirit, moving through form, the form is the container, and it is also the expression of what spirit is doing. So that's an important thing to sense in with, because once we can accept those parameters of our life, we can really begin living our life wholeheartedly, or more wholeheartedly. Paul also brings our reflexes, in the sense of, driving, how to make sure you don't crash. Our physical agility, our just basic physicality, how grounded we are in our embodiment, and or how nervous or perhaps jumpy or flighty we are, and or if it keeps going in that direction, how maybe phobic we become about things that might impact our well-being. So the third thing is our adaptive capacity with respect to our healing our physical body and healing our emotional or somado-emotional self that we feel as embodied states. One way that we look at this, perhaps more in the body, is the paw is related and is considered to kind of reside in your, or is perhaps stored by your lungs. And that doesn't just mean your physical lungs, it's that system in Chinese medicine. And that helps us integrate in the physical world as soon as we breathe our first breath, and it allows us to sort of slowly separate from the world as a corporeal soul out at the end of our last breath. And because of that aspect of Chinese medicine and emotionality, we often relate to the paw as the part of us that wants to grieve the woundedness, to deal with our grievances, to deal with the imbalances, the things that don't seem fair or authentic in the way people's bodies are used or treated. And, that can get into some pretty specific stuff. But grieving isn't just about sadness. Grievance, to be aggrieved. All of those words mean you're in a kind of complex emotional pain, and during the grieving process, it can separate into some anger, some sadness, some regret, some disappointment, some loss, some perhaps joy, and other things that can all come from what we learn as we grow. And this helps us with any kind of unresolved trauma. It helps us in moments of difficulty when we're perhaps more skilled with these things. Because otherwise we get stuck kind of fighting with our intuition, fighting with our emotionality, fighting with our instincts in a way. And that's when things really get complicated. That's when the psychology, psychiatry part really comes to become important. So, because it's settles in the lungs in that way and has a lot to do with grieving or unearthing the turmoil of emotion before we can break it down to individual emotions, one of the most effective ways to interact with Pa and to begin the process of healing in that way is breath work. Relates to your lungs, but also relates to state shift and to a curious kind of inquiry about what we maybe need to learn, need to feel, and perhaps to lose a bit of our sense of control. Because until we loosen those boundaries and that boundedness, we can't really begin the grieving, healing, changing process. There's another aspect of Pa we call the seven Pa, and that has more to do with kind of the ghouls and ghosts that people can turn into as they become more resentful, more regretting, more angry, more loathing of everything, probably including themselves. And as that becomes kind of a sense of identity, the concern from a ancient shamanic aspect of Chinese medicine is when you die, if that Pa is still held in your corporeal soul, it will turn into, again, we're not taking this literally, but a kind of ghost. Or it might be passed on to your kids, and you can see that in families that have really rigid religions or rules or punishments or the complete lack of anything that contains things. People often grow as people formed really, really profoundly by their environment. And sometimes we have to relieve ourselves of the kind of Pa or the ghouls and ghosts of our family history and what we often nowadays call ancestral trauma or generational trauma, because it's still held in our sense of who we are. When we come to Shen, the idea of spirit, I think it's interesting when we think of the word in English, spirit. Nowadays, it kind of means a secondary component of you that's kind of like a ghost that's there, but will still be there in another way when you die. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's an interesting thing to do, is to see spirit as somehow separate from the body. One way to play with this a little bit is when you look at English, the language, and how it evolved in the last few hundred years, the term spirit was much more used to describe the anima, the vitality, the briskness of something in many ways. And the expression I often use to demonstrate is that would be, wow, that horse over there, watching how it moves and lives and plays and does all of its animate behavior, that horse has a lot of spirit in its behavior. So when we say that, we're not saying that horse is haunted by a ghost that's maybe happy. we're describing the animate nature of the horse. So the word spirit doesn't always mean a ghost. It kind of also means something about us that you can see in the eyes, that you can see in the openness, the playfulness, the curiosity of each individual being. There's a lot of ways spirit can be interacted with. So one way we talk about this is in Chinese is sin shen, which is more your spirit mind, or the part of your mind that's open to the bigger what ifs. It's the part of your mind and yourself that's maybe more open to interacting with the challenging parts, the physical wounds, the physical pain, the emotional wounds, the emotional pain, and anything that might be coming in, to your experience, again, from the past. We also have this sense of Jing Shen, or essence and spirit, or the embodiment of awareness that allows us to feel our existence and our experience, but just as embodiment and physical isness of joints and muscles and tissues and gravity and movement and things like that. And there's also what we call yuan shen, which is the unborn mind or spirit in the sense of meditation, because in Zen practice we often say, who is the one meditating? And in that way we're asking people to inquire, in the sense of attention and identity, what's behind the mind that is you. And given 10 years or something of that kind of practice, you might find the one meditating becoming much more aware of many aspects of themselves. So interesting to play with. One way that in the modern context we can kind of observe Shen in life is the example of a magnet, a piece of paper, and metal filings being poured over that. You can't really see a magnetic field unless you have some particles to give it some shape. So in the sense of spirit in life, it's through our behavior, through our responses, through our, extremes of how we behave. There's also a sense that in the context of Shen or spirit, that we are asking ourselves to not just be presumptuous about that. We're also encouraging ourselves as people who practice the meditation to be curious about what it would be like to just keep opening our sense of our eyes, or the one looking, or how seeing works, or how awareness works. Because if we were to presume as individuals that the awareness we have right now, what we may call mundane awareness, is our spirit's awareness, we're probably never going to actually get to even experiencing that aspect of consciousness directly. We say in the classics that the heart beholds Shen. So heart being mind, heart being emotion, heart being cognition, heart being you could say even the biochemistry of too much coffee, too much alcohol, and things like that. When we behold Shen, it isn't just that we're holding Shen again with those open eyes of reverence, or spiritual connection, or being open to what we call the sacred. Spirits need a lot of room, if not infinite room, so the more tightness we have in our heart, the less beholding we have, and the more holding in, holding back, holding down, making sure no one else can take advantage of us in some way or something. So that's an important part also, is, like Hun in your liver, Po in your lungs, spirit in your heart. We can do a lot with our present health and choices and behaviors to make our innate wills come through more completely, and in fact maybe to invite them to come in more completely. When we really move in that direction, especially when Hun and Po are making friends, Shen and the other ones we'll talk about in a moment are all making friends, this is when our spiritual journey really becomes a journey. And in Daoist practice, we call this Shen Ming Zhi Dao, or the way of becoming spiritually luminous or radiant. Not in the sense that we're trying to outdo the sun, we're just kind of imitating what the sun is like, as an example of light or spirit. So if we move to Yi, the interactive awareness that we have, again, that precise little moment between intent and attent, as a part of our conscious mind. It's said to be, it resides in the lodge or the home of your somatic self, or the flesh of the body, the soma, and we have so much sensations in the body around many things, but especially intuition. And I'm not going to go into this too much, but there's a saying my teacher used to say, that the body is the mind before the mind is the mind. So how we are holding ourselves as somaticized consciousness determines often what we experience or will or won't experience as consciousness. So 3 things to be aware of about yi. There's a part of meditation practice we call yin yang, which is a very coherent kind of interactive, subtle, precise awareness that we do in more advanced aspects of qigong, alchemic practice, meditation, and things like that. A part of that that relates to modern science is called the orienting reflex, and that's a part of your mind that's kind of like the nose of a puppy. It's always looking for something that gives you what you need, and it's always looking for something that's going to cause you harm. So imagine you're just walking through your day, and I would encourage you to notice this in your own life, how your mind goes to, oh, I like that. Oh, that's not my favorite thing. Oh, yeah, that seems like fun. Oh, I'm not really sure about that. And your mind is just naturally orienting itself through life with that reflex. But it's also the unconscious way that your awareness chooses what fills your awareness. Now, a puppy running through your house looking for food and biting shoes and doing things is perhaps a lot less complex than human life. But the feeling inside of that is a big part of yi. And it has a lot to do with many other aspects of your emotional experience, your self-cultivation, and your churn. So another part of the yi that we experience in intention and attention is often referred to as the default mode network, or the part of your mind that has kind of like a constant email list of somewhat challenging experiences, things that are often social, that your mind wants to rehearse or rehash or relive so that we can learn from it. And that's a big part of what fills the internal dialogue, the reverie of thought, the things you wake up with first thing in the morning and suddenly can't stop thinking about. It's because those things are brought up into our awareness by default, so that we can keep reframing and relearning, and you could say neurologically re-entraining our behavior in the way that we understand to be more successful. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. And instead of perhaps relating to that as, no, I know this, I'm right, I never have to think about it again, it's inviting us to keep an awareness of our awareness, to allow our yi to just be in that reverie state of the incessant, nonstop emails that show up every couple of minutes that ask you, hey, what do you think about that conversation? Hey, that person who cut you off in traffic and gave you some pretty rude hand signs, what do you want to do about that? And when, again, that's coming up, it's helping us make better decisions before the next time we actually need to make those decisions, which is how we actually become skillful and mature and, more competent and confident. So when we're learning about this in the context of healing and growing and practicing, it's important to just be aware that your perception has a lot of defaults, and until you're willing to explore them for what they already are, it's not really possible to start shifting them. And that's often why we always encourage people to begin with embodied practice, so you can feel your feelings, and meditation practice, so you can get familiar with all of the things that happen in your mind, even if you didn't want to put them there on your own. Again, it's just to be aware that when we reside in our awareness, that the more we can feel what our body is feeling, solar plexus, shoulders, jaw, other places where we kind of pucker up a little bit, the more we can just feel into that and not do anything, fix anything, have an opinion about anything, and wait and see what happens when, and you could say all of the 5 snakes have had some time to be in that experience, then it's easier for us to begin making more adaptive explorations and experiments to see what might work better. Last one is called chur. Again, the character for that is basically a person picking up something like a tool or a spear or something that makes them more effective in the world, and then the way it feels to stay wholehearted with that. So, and this is maybe a triggering image, but imagine you're a village, and it's thousands of years ago, you're being attacked, you have a spear, maybe you've practiced with your spear, everyone's hoping you're the person who's going to be able to defend anyone, and your heart is completely in it. You've perhaps, you're willing to sacrifice your life. That's necessary. It's part of being a warrior. The part of you that holds all of that together and then points the spear in a direction because that's what's needed, that's what Chur means. Right? So it's really a lot more about heart and meaning than just willpower. And that distinction is profoundly important. Okay, so when we look at the three things that we want to pay attention to, first is the distinction between willpower and willingness. Like I said, willpower is against, willingness is for something. And they often seem to be the same thing until we have a practice and begin to explore. Another way to actually translate that term, Chur, is the term orientation, like the orientation of a compass. So when we are compassing and orienting ourselves through life, if we've had a really good upbringing and lots of good guidance, our orientation is probably what you might call true north or something. If we grew up in an environment that was very disorienting, you could say our compass dial might be pointing somewhere completely different. And the reorientation, disorientation process is mostly what Jing or the Chinese medicine psychotherapy process is about. Because it's a lot of conversations, a lot of embodiment practice, meditation, qigong, breathwork, so that we can attend to all of these things over time to heal and to grow and to let go. When we think about that orientation, disorientation thing, it's also important to drop into our sense of ethics, our rules, our boundaries, and maybe ask ourselves, and this is perhaps an odd context, but to not get divorced so much, but to have us sit down and decide whether or not you want to stay married to those behaviors, those orientations, those boundaries, those beliefs, those rules, whatever they might be, because they bound your will. And then you're not free in your autonomy to express your will as you will. So let's say every 5 years, it might be a good idea to just renegotiate the rules as you understand them and as you might want to choose them again. There's also a part of Chur that has to do with the distinction between being really audacious and really timid. Now, really audacious people can be fun, but they can also be overwhelming, and eventually you just need to run away from them. Really timid people, we want to take care of them because they don't really seem like they can take care of themselves in some ways, so we want to guide them, support them, help them. Willingness is somewhere in between those aspects of being like, and being, And I bring that up because you can be audacious, you could be timid, you could be capricious, which is kind of like slippery and tricky to get what you want, but you're not really being authentic. You're not really being rooted in your truth, and you're not really honoring your autonomy as a conscious being or the people you're being, say, capricious or tricky with. So that's things we want to be aware of with our will. And as our willingness becomes connected with the spirit and the awareness, the yi, again, when they come together, they create a will that wants to see something happen in the world. And that brings us back to what in Daoist practice we call Sheng and Ming, which is your innate aliveness, which is a feeling of your state and yourself, and your aliveness potential, which is a feeling of your state and self as it relates to your health and how long you're going to be here, and how much oomph you have to just move through the things you choose to do in your life and with your life. Okay, so now what? There's a saying I like to share, and it's a First Nation saying sometimes we say in sweat lodges and other ceremonies. And that is, healing begins when we remember that there's no cure. Healing begins when we remember that there's no cure. So how do we go about cultivating a deeper awareness and understanding? Hopefully with a traditional practice of some kind. Traditions still exist because they still work. So if you can find a tradition that you love and that you trust enough to kind of fall into, that trust game where you fall into someone and really hope they catch you. If you have a tradition and practice that feels like that, Now you are, in a sense, falling into an ocean. And again, keep in mind, if this isn't, in your mind right now, in this context, you are made of oceans, after all. So in the sense of falling back into this, you're not being asked to trust something tricky or join a cult or believe in anything that doesn't make sense to you. It's kind of implicit that you want to find a practice that you feel you can rely on that isn't taking you anywhere or advantage of you in any way. It's just supporting the endeavor of becoming your whole authentic self. And so one of the reasons I'm doing this is just to share something I found profoundly beautiful and kind of useful in about 30 years of clinical practice helping people. I'm teaching a course called Jing, or Embodied Psychotherapy, Spiritual Recapitulation, and Traditional Chinese Medicine. And I'll be offering more of these presentations between now and January to give people a sense of what it's all about. But if you are interested in Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbology, meditation, shamanism, Daoist practice, Zen practice, and you're aware that maybe understanding a little bit about healing minds, healing hearts, healing souls might support your practice, then I would encourage you to look into that course. And you can find that all over my Facebook page and things like that, or you can email me directly. My email is Dr. Mike, DOCTOR MIKE 888 @gmail.com. So if you want to email me there, please do. And I can send you any kind of links or information that you like. That course changed my life when I was studying Chinese medicine. I had no idea, honestly, that Chinese medicine had a psychiatric psychology department. And that's because there was a lot of things that changed in Chinese medicine when China kind of changed its political approach to being China. And a lot of the early indigenous, shamanic, spiritual aspects of Chinese medicine were kind of brushed under a carpet, so to speak. So I'm one of a few people in the West who's openly teaching Sheng now. If that doesn't feel like the place you want to go, there are other courses that I offer on Qigong. Some are just a week long, some are 10 weeks long, some are commitments to learn to be a teacher and things like that. So if you're interested in that, get a hold of me as well. And I also just started a Substack, so if you're on any of my email lists, you're probably starting to get those. And if you want to connect with me through there, please do, because the more I can engage with people, support people with information and what I have to offer, and people can support me enough, then I'm working in clinic less, and I'm writing books more, and I'm offering courses more. So I'm hoping to create that reciprocity as well. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you're well. If you have any questions, get a hold of me. And yeah, this whole thing is kind of sacred, and that changes everything. So have a great day.